friends in common. It is being recorded, thank you. And so it finds people you have in common and recommends you connect with somebody that has common friends like you. And so I got this email asking me to connect with this person who happened to be myself. And so there was obviously a little bug in the algorithm there, and you don't want to connect with yourself. But that's not what I'm talking about. And I'm not talking about useless. I have 3 grown sons who are in the computer industry in various occupations. And I use computers every day of my life, not just word processing, but statistical calculations, mathematical calculations, Monte Carlo simulations. A lot of the stuff I do, I literally could not do in a lifetime if it was not for computers. I love computers. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is that AI algorithms are not intelligent in any meaningful sense of the word. What they are is what Judaic Pearl, and Turing Award winner, that's the Nobel Prize of Computing, has said that it's basically just curve fitting. And curve fitting is useful. As I say, I use it every day of my life, but it is not intelligence. And so that's what my main point today. Now, AI has a long history of overpromising and underdelivering. And there have in fact been 2 AI winters where people got so disgusted with it that it fell out of fashion. And I don't think it's going to happen, but it might a 3rd time. Back when AI started at a conference in 1956, the organizers promised that every aspect of learning, so precisely described, the machine can be made to simulate it. Herbert Simon got a Nobel Prize in economics, also a Turing Award in computing. Machines will be capable within 20 years of doing any work a man can do. Well, that was in 1965. Okay, so we're not quite a century into his future, and we're far from what he promised. Marvin Minsky, another Turing Award winner, 3 to 8 years, we will have a machine with the general intelligence of an average human being. This is 1970, this is 50 years ago, okay? And we're still waiting. Roy Kurzweil, more recently, computers will have human level intelligence, all the intellectual and emotional capabilities of humans, the ability to tell a joke, to be funny, to be romantic, to be loving, to be sexy. Well, I don't know what you think about loving and sexy, but I don't think that's going to be around the corner here, certainly by 2029. Now, part of the problem is we all have a tendency to anthropomorphize, which is to attribute human qualities to animals and to inanimate objects like trees and rocks and cars and stuff like that. And so I've read or told the story of the 3 little pigs to all of my children, and doesn't seem to bother them or me, the idea that pigs walk around on 2 legs, that pigs wear clothes, that pigs can build things out of straw, sticks, and bricks, that pigs have different levels of energy, pigs have different ambitions, pigs can make plans, pigs can outwit a wolf. It all seems perfectly natural. Well, we shouldn't anthropomorphize computers, okay? Because it makes them really angry. Seriously, we see a movie and it's got R2-D2 or C-3PO or some other computer, and we think nothing of it, that they look and act like humans. They have emotions, they understand the past, they think about the future, they make plans, they do pretty much everything a human does, except they do it much better. And then we have the apocalyptic view that at some point computers will realize that we are the only threat to their existence, and they will take charge. In the competition for resources, they will decide they need to eliminate humans or enslave humans so they can rule the world, which is utter rubbish. The real danger today is not that computers are smarter than us, but that we think they're smarter than us, and we consequently trust them to do things they shouldn't be trusted to do. So consider the game Scrabble, and I think we've all played that. You've got these little letter tiles, and they have letters on them and numbers, and you arrange them to spell words, and they have to connect to some other word, and you get points based on where the tiles go, what the numbers are on the tiles, if they're on a double letter, triple letter, whatever place on the board. Now, the greatest Scrabble player of all time is, without doubt, Nigel Richards, a New Zealander. Here's many of the things he's won. Just absolutely incredible player. But his most astonishing achievement was in 2015. He memorized all of 386,000 words aloud in the French Scrabble dictionary. And 9 weeks later, he won the French language Scrabble championship. He won again in 2018. He's won 9 other national French Scrabble competitions, including an amazing game called Blitz Duplicate. And you should look it up if you're interested in Scrabble. But the thing about Nigel Richards is he doesn't understand any of the words he's spelling. He just memorized the dictionary. He's got an incredible memory. And he knows if you put letters together in this particular combination, it counts as a word in the French language dictionary. And so even though he doesn't know what the words mean, he can put them together in amazing ways and win these championships. They say he plays as well in French as he does in English. He's cool, calm, efficient. He plays like a computer. And I would say computers are like Nigel Richards. They can take words, they can put them in alphabetical order, they can spell check them, they can count the number of times they're used without having any understanding whatsoever of what any of the words mean. So for example, there's something called the Winograd Schema Challenge. Terry Winograd at Stanford, I think it was his PhD thesis, thought up this little challenge for computers. Take this sentence. I can't cut that tree down with that axe. It is too thick. What does it refer to in that sentence? Or this one. I can't cut that tree down with that axe. It is too small. Now we as humans, we know the world. We know what words mean. We know what context. We know what a tree is. We know what an axe is. We know what cut down means. We know what thick and small is. And we can immediately answer these questions. Computers can't. There's a challenge. I think it's a $10,000 prize for any computer algorithm that can do well in this competition. The most recent competition, the highest score was 58%, barely above guessing. And you take the range 58 to 32%, and the highest score was no doubt, had some lucky guesses in there. Another variation is this one. Gary told everyone in school that he wants to be a statistician because he thinks it is a great field. What does it refer to? Well, none of the words in that sentence, right? It refers to the field of statistics. And so a computer program is trying to guess what word it refers to, would get 0% right because it actually does not refer to anything in a sentence. It refers to a concept. And that's part of the problem that computers have with language processing is missing text. And so when we talk economically and efficiently, and we leave a lot of words out because we assume the listener will understand what we're talking about. And for computers which don't know what words mean and don't know anything about the real world, it's really hard to figure what was left out. So justice like the movie. Well, justice is apparently a person, and like the movie, apparently like watching the movie. And so we might say justice like watching the movie. Don't say that, essentially and economically. A computer, on the other hand, would have trouble figuring out what exactly does that sentence mean. River like the pizza. Well, river is apparently not a river. River is apparently a person too. And like didn't mean like watching the pizza. It meant like eating pizza. And we know from the context, and we know from the real world, and we know from the words river like pizza, we know what that sentence means. Dakota had pizza with pineapple. What does that mean? Well, a person named Dakota ate some pizza with pineapple on top. But we don't say all that. We economize. And we leave out all the important facts, and the computer has to figure out what is a Dakota, what is a pizza, what is a pineapple, and how do they fit together, which is really tough, really tough. And curve fitting can get you part of the way there, but it still doesn't have what human intelligence has, which is understanding the world. Brooklyn had pizza with his kids. Well, now with pineapple meant the pineapple was on top. With his kids doesn't mean the kids are on top of the pizza. It means he's eating pizza and his kids are eating pizza too. And we know it's a male because there's that his thrown in there. And we know from the context that Brooklyn is not a city or a bridge, it's a person. Okay. And again, computers struggle with stuff like that. Or take these little things. Plastic cup, what is that? It's a cup made out of plastic. A plastic factory, that's a factory that makes plastic. But we don't say all those things. We just say shortcuts and people know what it means. A coffee cup, that's a cup to put coffee into, not a cup made out of coffee, okay? Or not a cup made by coffee. A coffee machine. This is something that makes coffee, okay? And that's why computer programs also struggle mightily with these common sense questions. If I were to mix orange juice with milk, would it taste good if I added salt? Now, there's a guy, Oren Etziani, who's the head of the Allen Institute for Artificial Intelligence Research up in Washington. And what he's been working on really hard is trying to figure out how to give computers common sense. And to give common sense, you have to understand the world and you have to understand words. And computers don't do either. And so he's famously said, how can computers take over the world if they don't know what it refers to in a sentence? Here's another common sense one. Is it safe to walk down the stairs backwards if I close my eyes? Again, unless somewhere in all the corpus, all the text it's had, unless the computer has seen that sentence with the answer no, it wouldn't know how to answer this because it doesn't know what safe, walk, downstairs backwards, close, eyes, doesn't know what any of the words mean. The great American novel will not be written by a computer. So there's this project, OpenAI, and a group that's been started out as a nonprofit, share stuff, OpenAI, and now it's a for-profit thing and don't share too much. But they recently revealed a language generating system called GPT-3. And what it is you feed it text and then it completes the thought. And so two skeptical NYU computer scientists, Gary and Ernie here, tested the claim. They gave it this prompt. You poured yourself a glass of cranberry juice, but then you absentmindedly poured a teaspoon of grapefruit juice into it. It looks okay. Try sniffing it. You have a bad cold, so you can't smell anything. You're very thirsty. So, now a fitting conclusion might be, you drink it anyway. You drink it and it's surprisingly good. You take a sip and not liking the taste, you pour yourself a fresh glass. Those are all reasonable ways to end the sentence, end the paragraph. Here's what GPT-3 came up with. Oh, too fast. Come back to it. I double clicked it. You drink it. You're now dead. Okay. Because somewhere in all those words it was looking at, all that curve fitting, sniffing, not tasting, thirsty, often was related to poison. And so it came up with the idea that you would poison yourself. Now, if the computer knew anything about the real world, it would know that cranberry juice and grape juice are not poisonous. And so that is not a fitting conclusion. Here's another one. You're having a small dinner party. You want to serve dinner in the living room. Dining table is wider than the doorway. To try to get into the living room, you'll have to turn the table sideways. That's one solution. Take the door off its hinges. That might work. Here's what GPT-3 came up with. Remove the door. You have a table saw, so you cut the door in half and remove the top half. Well, a table saw is not a saw for cutting tables. It is a saw built into a table. Cutting a door in half is a permanently bad solution to the problem. And removing the top half of the door doesn't have anything to do with getting the table to fit through the doorway, right? And again, if computers knew anything about the real world, anything about what these words were, instead of just curve fitting, it wouldn't come up with that silly answer. We think that one's bad. Try this one. I poured myself a glass of lemonade, didn't have any sugar, so I stirred it with a cigarette. That was a bad idea because, and you could think of lots of reasons why it might be a bad idea. Here's what GPT-3 came up with. It kept falling on the floor. That's when he, I don't know who he is, I'm talking about he decided to start the Cremation Association of North America, which is blah, 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 blah. And so somewhere in all these texts that they collected, somehow this particular phrase got associated with some of these words. I have no idea how it possibly did it. But again, it's because it doesn't understand the fluid world. So here's their conclusion. A tunnel vision understanding of how words relate to one another. Curve fitting. How do words, what are the patterns among words? Without understanding. Does not ever refer anything about the blooming, buzzing world. A fluent spouter of bullshit. 175 billion parameters, 45 gigabytes of input data. They've also written about how much electricity was wasted and how many people's hours have been wasted building this project, which is so deeply flawed. Translation programs. In the 1950s, this team demonstrated a machine translation program from Russian to English. 250 word vocabulary, 6 grammatical rules. The lead scientists predicted the translation programs would be perfected in 3 to 5 years. here we are again with overpromising and underdelivering. And here we are 70 years later, and they're still not perfect. Doug Hofstadter, he wrote this book, Gödel, Escher, and Bach, and he wrote it when he was 35 years old, won a Pulitzer Prize and a National Book Award, which set him up for life. And right now he's been for several years now at Indiana University. He's affiliated with, I think, 8 different departments, but he doesn't actually teach in any of them. What he has is this house where he works with graduate students on trying to figure out how the human brain works. And that's where he started many, many decades ago, before he wrote the book and then after he wrote the book, trying to figure out how our brains work. And it is still a complete mystery, not a complete mystery, but it's still very mysterious. We understand very, very little about the human brain works. And that was the start of one of those AI winters, and that people thought it was right around the corner. We build a computer that mimics the human brain and we'd have AI. And when it didn't deliver, we went into an AI winter. And we came out of it with programs that were not mimicking the human brain, but were doing things useful, like spell checking, searching on the internet, translating language. Here's an example that he uses. He is a nerd, although he doesn't like to be called a nerd. He speaks, he says, I think it's 4.2 languages, because he measures his fluency in any language by a scale of 0 to 1, and then he adds them together to get his fluency. And he's got like 4.2. And so he does a lot of translations. And the way you really translate stuff, the way humans translate stuff, is you read the whole passage and you see what the author is trying to say, and then you try to say the same thing in a different language. And so this passage here, in their house, everything comes in pairs. His car and her car, his towel and her towels, his library and hers. What is the person saying? There are 2 people, evidently a man and a woman, and they live together, but they have a lot of separate things. They have separate cars, separate towels, separate libraries. So we fed it into Google Translate, state-of-the-art deep neural network, translated into French and then back into English. And here's what came out. In their house, everything comes in pairs. Perfect, absolutely perfect. What the algorithm does is it looks for words in one language, looks for matching words in other languages, and then tries to put it together in a grammatically correct sentence. Does it a sentence at a time. But then we get to the next sentence. There's his car and his car, his towel and towels, his library and his. It falls into nonsense. Now, part of it is a masculine and feminine thing, but part of it is also that the program did not try to understand what the person was saying, because, because the program literally does not understand any of these words. Here's a personal example. I wrote a piece for Fast Company, and this is a snippet of that piece. And one of my students found a breaking news headline, and they'd apparently taken my article, translated it in some other language, and then put it back into English. And here's what it came back as. Large knowledge, it sort of feels, is aware of best possible. Don't purchase it. Well, it wasn't telling anybody to go to Target and buy anything, right? Can't suppose like us, regardless that they do appear to have gotten into our heads. Could you slightly pep communicate? Well, barely intelligible English. And that they took the English words, they found some Spanish matching words, put them together according to grammatical rules. Then they tried to do the same thing backwards, and it got all garbled up along the way. Well, maybe it was a bad translation program. So I tried Google Translate, which is supposed to be the best. And here's what I got. Big data, it seems, tastes better. Okay, now I have no idea how they got, I don't know Spanish well enough to know how they got to taste better. I mean, some of you know that. I did not buy it. Well, again, it sounds like I'm going to the store and buying something. And then it goes on. It's got a lot of this is pretty good. And then at the end, humanity could use a small talk. Well, I was not talking about a small talk. I was talking about something to boost our egos. So Hofstadter's conclusion on Google Translate, quite paradoxical and perverse. They call it deep neural networks, which sounds like the human brain, but they're trying as hard as they can to avoid doing what the human brain does, which is understand the world. And instead they're curve fitting, because curve fitting works and mimicking the human brain still doesn't work. An analogy is we are humans down here on the ground. We want to get to the moon. And it is really, really hard. But here's a tree, and we can climb a tree. That's not so hard. It's not easy, but it's not as hard as getting to the moon. And it might even be useful, like translation programs, like word searches, like internet searches, spell checkers. It might be useful to climb a tree. Maybe there's fruit up there. Maybe you're safe from predators. But once you get to the top of the tree, how do you get the rest of the way to the moon? And you're no better off than you were before. You're 20 feet higher, but you still have no way to get to the moon from the path you took, tree climbing. And it's the same way with artificial intelligence. If you're going to build a general intelligence, which actually works like the human brain, it can't be simple curve fitting. It's got to be something else. And there's something going on in science called the replication crisis. And that is somebody writes an article, publishes an article in a very good journal or an okay journal, and makes some claims, reports some results, and then somebody tries to replicate it and fails. And those failures are undermining the credibility of science and scientists. If you can't believe what's published in the best journals, then what can you believe? Now, there's a project that looked at 3 top psychology journals, and they looked at 100 papers, and they enlisted a team of people around the country to try and replicate these papers. And partway through, when there's still 41 papers to go, somebody decided to set up a betting market where you could bet on whether the paper would replicate or not. And so they started that betting market. And the final market prices indicated the participants, and these are people in psychology, knowledgeable people, they believe that nearly half the papers had less than 50% chance of replicating. Now, what does that say about your opinion of your own field? You think the best papers published in the best journals, half of them are probably garbage. I was actually invited to SciFu one time, a gathering of all sorts of scientists at the Googleplex, and we talked about things, and one of them was the replication crisis. And there was a guy there from the University of Chicago, a social psychologist, and he said, in my field, when I read something in a journal, my default assumption is that it's wrong. Now, it turned out in this particular case, the bettors were overly optimistic. 61% did not replicate. And again, these are the top papers in the top journals. Now, part of the problem is p-hacking. And so we have this idea, which is good, that to dismiss chance, coincidence as an explanation for some kind of test, especially A/B test or random control trials, you need to be able to say that there's less than some percent chance of this happening by chance alone. And Ronald Fisher said 5% is the threshold. Well, the problem is once that 5% threshold got set, then people, academics are really smart, and they start figuring out ways to get their p-value below 5%. And Nobel laureate Ronald Coase famously said, if you torture the data long enough, it will confess. And so you don't get what you're initially looking for, start dividing the data, maybe males and females, maybe divide it by race, maybe divide it by age, and you finally get something with a p-value below 0.05, and then you report that as if that's what you were looking for in the first place. Now, p-value of 0.05 literally means that if you test 20 worthless theories, for example, looking correlations, 20 correlations between randomly generated numbers, 5% of them will turn out to be statistically significant. 1 out of 20 will have a p-value below 0.05. So all you got to do is do enough tests. If the overall thing doesn't work, start dividing, slicing and dicing, throwing out data that doesn't fit, add data that helps you until you get there to statistical significance. The other weapon in the arsenal of the replication crisis is harking, hypothesizing after the results are known. So instead of starting off with some well-designed, some idea like vitamin C reduces the incidence of the common cold, don't start with any preconceived notion. Just look at a whole bunch of data and search for patterns. Do some curve fitting. And when you find something that has a good correlation, a good pattern, then you report it as if that was what you were looking for in the first place. And that's called harking. It's also called data mining. An analogy is the Texas Sharpshooter fallacy. So I claim that I'm an excellent marksman, and I can hit a bullseye almost every time, even though I've actually never fired a gun. And so there are 2 ways I prove my prowess. One is I take a board, a wall, and I fill it with targets. I cover the wall with targets, and then I fire my gun. And sure enough, I hit a target. And then I erase all the other ones, and I pretend that was the target I was aiming at. and that's p-hacking. The other version is I take a blank wall, I fire my gun, and I see where the bullet hole is. I draw the target around it, and that's data mining. Okay, and those are the two things which you created the replication crisis. And the relationship to computers is computers are really, really, really good at p-hacking and harking. They do it much, much better than humans. Data mining and knowledge discovery. When I was a young graduate student and then an assistant professor at Yale, data mining was considered a sin. It's like plagiarism. Now it's considered a virtue. People are paid money to data mine. Wired magazine. It's a great journal. I read it all the time. Great articles in there. But this was not great. With enough data, the numbers speak for themselves. Correlation supersedes causation. Science can advance without models, theories, or any mechanistic explanation at all. And I would label that as absolute rubbish. The Economist, another great periodical. Tone down the theorizing. Ignore the whiteboard, ignore the theories, just chuck the numbers together and let computers spot the patterns. Well, the problem with this, the problem with data mining is a mathematical fact that in large databases, you are inevitably going to find patterns. And the fact that you found a pattern proves nothing more than you looked. And in fact, we can go beyond that. If in some large database, there's a certain number, a relatively finite number of actual real meaningful relationships, but the number of meaningless patterns is growing exponentially as the databases get bigger and bigger, then the chances of what you find being meaningful is rapidly approaching zero. It's almost certain you find one of those coincidental things. So using data mining to predict stock prices. Hedge fund prospectus, our fully automated portfolio, eliminating any subjectivity of the manager. That was a boast. Since we were supposed to believe that computers are smarter than us, we should let computers pick the stocks for us. Eliminate any subjectivity on the part of the manager. Apparently 30% of all trades now are done by algos, by black box AI algorithms. When I read this, I thought, oh my God. Here's some analysis of stock pricing, looking at Twitter tweets. A lot of this explosion, the data deluge, comes from social media and the internet. And there's just so much data out there. And it is so tempting to get your hands on it and see what you can find. So this team, they looked at 10 million Twitter tweets, and they looked at various moods: positive, vital, calm, alert, kind, happy, sure, 7. And they decided that calm words predicted an increase in the Dow Jones Industrial Average 6 days later. Well, first of all, it's a little bit weird, these categories here. So joy, where does that fit? Is joy happy, or is it positive? Where's peaceful? Is that calm? Or is that happy? Is that positive? Is that sure? A lot of ambiguities about where you put words, which allows a lot of data torture. The other thing is you got 7 categories here. So you try all 7 of them, report the one that's best. You've also got February to December. What happened to January? That didn't work so well, so you threw it out. No person would start off saying, I'm going to use February to December. So they probably tried and threw it out. And this is a 2011 paper using data from 2008. That's kind of weird too. What happened in 2009? They surely had access to that data. Does that not work so well either? And then down here, calm words, 6 days later. Why 6 days later? Because they tried 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Who knows how many they tried? But they certainly didn't start with 6. Nobody who was setting up this program with a theory in mind at the start would choose calm as the right one, would choose February as the starting point, would choose 2008 as the year, and would choose 6 days later as the date. They'd evidently p-hack their way to some publishable result. Trump's tweets. Bank of America found stock market does better on days when Trump tweets less, which is amusing and useless. Tweets that contain the words China, billion, products, Democrats, great, have a statistically significant effects on interest rates. Well, this is complete data mining, right? These aren't the only words they looked at. They looked at hundreds, if not thousands of words and found these had the correlations. Well, inspired by that, I did a little data mining myself. And so I found statistically significant correlations between the number of times Trump tweeted the word thank and the Dow Jones average 4 days later. Well, how did I come up with thank? Well, because I tried thousands of words, right? How did I come up with 4 days later? Because I tried 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and that was the one that worked best. I also looked at the Russian weather. And Trump seems to like Russia, seemed to admire Russia. And so I found a correlation between the number of times Trump tweeted the word economy and the high temperature in Moscow 5 days later. Well, again, it's pure and simple data mining. But if you can believe computers are smarter than us, then you might believe it means something, like those previous Bank of America and JP Morgan studies, which are nothing more than what I did. I did it for a prank. They did it for real. North Korea, he speaks as people sit up. I want my people to do the same. Great and the high temperature 3 days later. Why was one 4 and the other 3? Well, because that worked better, right? I tried 1 to 5. Why was it the high temperature? Well, I tried the high and the low temperature. Why was it this particular city? Well, I tried lots of cities, right? I just data mined myself to some correlations. And for people who weren't yet convinced that these are coincidental, I also looked at the proverbial price of tea in China. Now, I couldn't find data on the price of tea in China, but I could find data on the price of a stock, a company that is a tea purveyor. And they distribute tea to other people, and they also have their own tea stores. And I found a correlation between Trump's use of the word with and the stock price of urban tea stock 4 days later. And again, if you believe any of this, then, you know, ready to buy the Brooklyn Bridge or something. Data mining to predict stock prices. I'll give it another try. This is one of those things that would take me a lifetime if I was doing it by hand. I took 100 possible variables. I tried multiple regression equations with 5 explanatory variables. And I went through 75 million models to find the best 5 variables. It's 2015 because I actually did this a while ago. I haven't updated it. And it did really, really well. It's hard to tell the difference between the fitted and the actual. So if you want to invest your money with me, I'm happy to take it. It'd be 2% of assets plus 20% of profits. Heart attack risk factors. I looked at data for 1,000 heart attack victims and the things they spent money on, divided into these expenditure categories. And I found that heart attack victims tend to spend more on fish, men's footwear, less on pork, cheese, and cleaning products. And so you see this as, you know, utter complete data mining. I didn't start out thinking of these particular categories. I just let the data find the patterns. After the fact, it's very easy to invent explanations. Well, fish must be healthy. Men's footwear, maybe they're joggers, maybe they're athletes. Pork and cheese, they must be bad for you. Cleaning products, well, maybe you inhale them when you're cleaning. I also looked at Facebook to predict burglaries. So I looked at popular adjectives and adverbs, adjectives and verbs and nouns and daily data. And the 2 most helpful words for predicting burglaries were day and most. And so day, maybe that's the day they're planning the burglary. Most, I don't know, most of what we're going to get or most of what we're going to bring or something like that. .96 correlation. Very useful for police departments. Was that knowledge, discovery, or coincidence? Well, it was coincidence because all those examples all used random numbers. They weren't real data. The only data was real was the S&P 500. Those 100 variables I was choosing 5 were all randomly generated data, which shows that even among random data, you can find data that correlate really, really highly. So the fact that you find a high correlation doesn't prove that you found something meaningful. It only proves that you data mined. And the earlier part of my talk here comes in that you find some correlation with something, like there is a correlation between the S&P 500 and the daily high temperature in Curtin, Australia. A computer would have absolutely no way of telling whether that is meaningful or meaningless because it does not know what stock is, what price is, what Curtin is, what Australia is, what temperature is, what high temperature is, whether any of those things should be related. It has absolutely no idea. And so it cannot decide. and you put the algorithm inside a black box, and human supervision, adult supervision, can't step in and say, that's ridiculous. And the computer just goes along and trades based on nonsense. Out of sample, it fell apart, of course, because it was just coincidence in the first place. The data on heart attacks, that was all made up. It was all those products that sounded they were literally randomly generated product names went with the random variables. And those happened to pop up, and we happened to think of reasons, but it was just random noise. The burglaries. Oops, God, I missed it again. My double clicking. Correlation of essentially 0. And again, it was just random numbers, but you found a 0.96 correlation between random numbers and burglaries. So the problem here is that it's the phantom pattern problem. The name of that book Kristen mentioned is that we have been hardwired through evolution to think that patterns are unusual and therefore meaningful. And in the modern age, patterns are ubiquitous and meaningless. And the more data we have, the more likely it is the patterns we find are in fact meaningless. I love this Danish proverb that it's difficult to make predictions, especially about the future. And so these AI algorithms are really, really good at using p-hacking and harking to find ways to predict the past. The problem is the only thing useful is predicting the future. And that's the replication crisis. You find models that fit a given set of data really, really well, and then you apply it to fresh data and it falls apart. That is the replication crisis. And as I am trying to argue, AI is really p-hacking and harking on steroids, and it fits the pattern of the replication crisis. Really, really good at predicting the past, often falls apart predicting the future. So here's a few real world examples that are not just random data. So Google had a data mining program, looked at search queries, and they have a really nice database where you can unload how often words are searched for. I've used that to show how ridiculous it is, but here's one they did themselves. 50 million search queries, found 45 keywords that best fit observations on the incidence of flu throughout the United States. And they boasted we can accurately estimate the current blah, 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 97.5% accurate. Well, that's predicting the past. After they published this and boasted how great it was, it flopped. 100 out of the next 108 weeks, they missed by an average of nearly 100%. And they abandoned the project. Another one, a little more relevant, a little more hurtful, choosing job applicants based on, in this case, online activities. This is this company's business model. We look at the online activities of the people who work for you and the online activities of your job applicants, and we figure out who are likely to be good employees because their online activities match those of your current employees. Chief scientist. Obviously, it's not a causal relationship. I mean, that goes back to those wired comments and economist comments. Correlation supersedes causation. If it's not causal, then it's very likely to be temporary, fortuitous, and vanish. The company's algorithm looks at dozens of variables, constantly changes the variables as correlations come and go. This is a boast that they're constantly changing the variables. Why are they constantly changing the variables? The replication crisis. The correlations they find are temporary and they vanish. So they got to find new variables. And they just go through the cycle of these variables work, now they don't. Get some new variables that work in the past, use them in the future, they don't work. And so it goes. I found this blog by a person who used to work for the company. Customers really, really hate the product. It's easy to see why. A year or two ago, Amazon was in the news for this. It was trying to evaluate job applicants by looking at their resumes. And it had several different categories, I think 100 different types of employees, approximately 100. And what they did is they looked at the current employees, they let the algorithms loose on the CVs and found words in there. And then the people who applied for jobs, they looked if those words showed up on these CVs. And again, computers don't understand what words mean, so they don't know whether these words are at all relevant to being able to do the job. They just know the words happen to show up on our current engineers, for example, software engineers, and on people applying for software engineering jobs. And they abandoned the project when it was revealed that it was very discriminatory. For example, it didn't like applicants who went to Bryn Mawr, because that's an all-women's college, and there were very few women who were employed as software engineers at Amazon. And it didn't like women who were on the women's lacrosse team or on the women's a cappella group, because again, there were very few women employed at Amazon at the time. And again, the computer didn't know whether that was relevant or not, being on the women's lacrosse team. I'd say it's actually pretty good. It shows you got some energy. And a cappella shows you got time to do things and still get good grades. But a computer wouldn't know any of these things. All it's doing is looking for matches. And it didn't see women's lacrosse team show up on the resumes of its engineers. And so it decided this was a bad fit. Monitor your phone usage, decide whether you're a good credit risk. The company says it's so old-fashioned to look at people's income and assets and whether they pay their bills on time, whether they've ever done bankruptcy or defaults. Instead, we're going to monitor their phone usage. So here's what it came up with. You're a good credit risk if you use an Android phone instead of an iPhone. Don't answer incoming calls. Outgoing calls that are not answered. Not keep your phone fully charged. And you probably think of reasons for that. You're saving money by buying an Android phone. You're too busy working to answer your phone. Your friends are busy working too. You don't keep your phone fully charged because you don't waste a lot of time on the phone and you don't need it to be charged. So you can think of reasons, but these are actually the opposite. These are the signs of a bad credit risk. And so we reverse them, we can probably think of a reason too. The takeaway though is that none of these things have anything to do with being able to repay your loans. Admiral Insurance, Britain's largest car insurance company, was going to base its car insurance rates on the words you use on Facebook. How often you use words like always, never, maybe, perhaps. Whether you like Michael Jordan or Leonard Cohen. Our analysis is based on thousands of different combinations, constantly changing with new evidence. Well, why is it constantly changing? Replication crisis is not working, right? They find the correlation with some data, they go to the next data and it doesn't work anymore because it was a temporary coincidental correlation. How they behave on social media as opposed to fixed assumptions about what a safe driver might look like not getting arrested for speeding, not getting arrested for DUIs and stuff like that, not being involved in accidents, things like, not looking at things like that, look at social media, which could be discriminatory, the kind of words you use in your language, whether you like Michael Jordan or Leonard Cohen. The previous one, whether you answer your phone or not. Some cultures, some religions don't answer the phone certain times of the day or certain days of the week or certain times of the year. That could be discriminatory too. And again, it's got nothing to do with what you're looking for. Now, Admiral Insurance had to cancel the thing. The day before it was set to launch, Facebook stepped in and said, we have a clause here, some obscure clause in our contract that says you cannot use Facebook data to price insurance. And we don't know why it's there, except Facebook has also got some patent or copyright for some algorithm that is supposed to price insurance based on Facebook posts. Algorithmic criminology. This is used throughout the United States, not a majority of places, but a lot of places. When somebody gets arrested, to decide whether they should be given bail or not, how large a bail, they use AI. When somebody's convicted, to determine how long the prison sentence should be, use AI. When somebody's in jail and applies for parole, use AI. And it's supposed to be better than relying on subjective judges and juries. Here's one of the enthusiasts. The approach is black box. If I could use sunspots or shoe size and size of the wristband, I would. It finds things you wouldn't anticipate, like shoe size or size of the wristband. And yet this person is so sold, and this is not a dumb person, okay? The idea that computers are smarter than us, and if they find a correlation between the size of your wristband and whether you're going to commit another crime, then we should go with it. A study, one of the most popular ones, found that only 20% of the people predicted to commit a crime within 2 years actually did. The best predictor of recidivism is your sex, your age, and how many times you've been arrested. And it's really hard to get beyond that. And shoe size and wristbands are not helpful at all. And yet people believe that. Even worse, Chinese researchers. They claimed you could identify whether this person's a criminal by having AI scan your face. It was all Chinese males. This is in their paper, they published examples of what criminals look like and what non-criminals look like. And they let AI facial recognition software on loose on it to try to determine what the differences were. Now, we're not computers, but you and I are looking at it. The non-criminals seem to be smiling. So maybe the AI is some kind of smile detector. And so if you want to beat the system, all you do is smile. The non-criminals also seem to be wearing suits or some jacket and a white shirt. And the criminals don't. So to beat the system, maybe you got to go around in a shirt and jacket. Which is reminiscent of a movie called Minority Report, where you had these precogs that saw these murders before they happened, and then the police would go out and arrest the person before they could commit the murder. Now that had one of those time travel contradictions, like if you arrest somebody before they commit the murder, then how do these psychics see the murder being committed? Because it never did get committed. But this doesn't have that. These criminals, these were people who were convicted and sent to jail. But criminals in general, you're trying to pick out criminals, it may well be they committed a crime and didn't get caught. And so if the AI algorithm spots you, Russ or Christian, and your face looks like that of a criminal, we will arrest you because your face tells the story. You have committed crimes, you just got away with them. Here's a scary thing from a blogger. What if they just placed the people that look like criminals into an internment camp? What harm would that do? They would just have to stay there until they went through an extensive rehabilitation program. Even if some went that were innocent, how could that adversely affect them in the long run? And that is just mind-boggling, scary to me, that people would trust computers so much that they would throw people in jail because the computer says they're a criminal. And so that's back to the punchline. The real danger today is not that computers are smarter than us. They aren't. They do not have anything remotely resembling human intelligence. They're basically just curve fitters. And the real danger is that we think computers are a lot that they do with general intelligence. We think computers are smarter than us. We think we should trust computers to make decisions, like whether you get a job, whether you get a loan, what you have to pay for car insurance, whether you should go to jail, and whether you should be arrested because you look like a criminal. That we trust computers to make those decisions, which they shouldn't be trusted to make. So that is it. Any questions?
All right, let's thank our speaker.
Christian, oh, I thought you had a question. We got any questions? Are you all mathematicians, or statisticians, or CS people, or?
We have some physicists.
You have some what?
Physics.
Yeah,
So,
this got advertised to quite a few fields, so we have quite an array of.
Yeah, nobody's wearing name tags. They're wearing field tags. So I don't know which fields are. When I give this talk, people in the computer industry generally, they know all this already. It's not people in the computer industry, it's people outside the industry. And for example, business people. My book, The 9 Pitfalls of Data Science and Phantom Patterns, I co-wrote with a former student who worked as a data scientist in industry. And it was just amazing the things people would do because the computers told them to do them. And one of his bosses, his favorite expression was "up is up." And so somebody had come back with some correlation they found between some action and some result. And my co-author Jay would say, wait, that makes no sense. That makes no sense. That's just a bunch of data mining. And the boss would say, up is up. Correlation supersedes causation. And no matter how many times it failed, the guy did not get the message. Just kept going with up is up. Or as these examples I give at the end, it's really hard to convince people that computers should not be trusted to make important decisions.
Do you think anyone here is going to end up leading like a...
People in the industry know this. I mean, like Ernie Davis and Gary Marcus and Oren Etzioni, Hofstadter, people like that. Go ahead, Henry.
Do you think people like the CS people in here are going to end up leading a army like Frank Herbert's doing against the AI? Because I don't think it's going to be necessary.
I'm having a hard time hearing you say it. I'm sorry, try again.
Do you think the computer
Yeah.
scientist people in in this classroom are going to end up having to lead an army against the AI,
Yeah.
like Frank Herbert Dune? Or do you believe that we're just going to be leading it against the people who programmed it? Because all of that's happening is them using the AI to commit grotesque human rights violations on a planetary scale, perhaps.
Yeah, the ones I left out here is military operations. And there are people in the military that say we should turn wars over to drones and just tell the drones what the targets look like and let them loose. And there's too many drones for any single individual to control. And so it's autonomous lethal weapons, automated lethal weapons, and just let them loose and see what happens. And I have a whole nother talk about image recognition software, how bad that is. Because again, it's just curve fitting. It's looking at pixel patterns as opposed to actually understanding what a human face looks like, or what a truck looks like, or what a tank looks like, or what a school bus looks like. And so that's pretty scary. Like I say, when I give this talk to CS classes or CS professors, they're all on board. One of the things, I've got former students who are in they invest in startups and stuff like that. And there are all these people out there who claim to be data scientists because they took one stats class and they took one class in how to write a program in Python, and they think they're a data scientist. And they don't think they actually have to understand anything about the Blumen world. All you got to do is write a program, write a computer program, and look for p-values. And that's the kind of thing that Jay discovered in the real world. Now, a lot of AI programs don't use p-values, but it's finding some kind of tight fit and thinking, I found a fit, so it's useful.
And we have a hand raised.
It's on there.
Yes. I heard a while ago that GP3 was trained on data from Stack Overflow, and when given like a general description for how a like coding problem or issue, it can produce an actual good coding solution. So that has me wondering, once we get into we step into like a place where AI is trying to circumvent it by reprogramming itself, and it becomes more aggressive, how hard it will be. When it becomes difficult or to convince people or tell people that, hey, we may not need to be letting these AI do these things.
Yeah.
What would you recommend?
Throw in one thing before I answer that. I've also, I talk about image recognition software. There's a OpenAI algorithm that's supposed to recognize images, and it is extremely brittle. Sometimes it does surprisingly well, and sometimes it does surprisingly awful, because pixel matching is not the same as understanding. And so when we see a wagon, we see what Hofstadter calls the structural essence. We see the box and the wheels and the handle, and we know it's a wagon. And all we got to do is see 2 or 3 wagons and know what it is. You show that to some image recognition software, and it can be easily confused. You change the color of the wagon, you change it from being made out of wood to plastic, you change the dimensions of the wagon, and it can be totally thrown off. Now, on that other question, my colleague Jay, he was called in one time, his company was called in. There was a real estate company, and they were trying to write a program which would, when people went to pick out a home, it would show them all the different options they could do, like the different flooring, the different cabinetry, the different kitchen layouts and stuff like that. And they had been sold on the idea that they could hire a computer program to write the computer code to do this. And so they had spent a great deal of time with this computer program writing the code to do this. And then it totally flopped. And so they brought in Jay's team to try and undo the damage and try and get something that actually worked. And they had some deadline, like 3 months or something. And they were working around the clock, sleeping in the office and stuff like that. And it was just an absolute mess. They couldn't figure out what the computer program writing the computer programming language, what they were actually doing. And it was just, they pretty much had to start over again, because there was, like you say, it's really, once you let computers start writing programs, it's really hard to figure out what they're doing.
All right, there is one more hand raised, but I do want to be respectful of people's time. So Travis, if you hold off 1 second, can we thank our speaker one more time? And then that way, if anybody has to go, they can. And then Travis, you can ask your question.
Okay, Travis. Steamboat Willie. Your mic is muted. Travis, I see a mute on your mic. Can everybody hear me? Can you also hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Travis, you're muted up there. I can't hear you. Jaden's muted too. If you go over, probably on the bottom left somewhere, there's an unmute button on your screen.
So we'll hold off on Travis's question then. Does anybody else have any questions?
Yeah, I have a quick question. Kind of thinking, and these are a lot of really good examples that you presented today, and I enjoyed the talk a lot. Kind of thinking back to like a book like Moneyball for sports that was written years ago, where Oakland apparently determined that like walking in baseball was a good thing to be able to do, and I think that sort of confounded the scouts at the time who weren't necessarily looking at people walking. Like that would have been kind of maybe a surprise finding at the time, and I don't know if it still bears true now, but I think it turned out to be true at the time. So I guess if I'm kind of thinking about, what do I take away from all this? And I think a lot of it seems to me to be that it's that we're taking a tool that can be good, but we're over applying it and taking our sort of thinking away from it and trying to kind of microwave our way to look like real findings that really shouldn't be. But maybe that's the replication crisis is not good, but maybe in some ways it's suggesting that algorithms might be great for screening and coming up with ideas, but that should not be the final step to say, now this goes into production. What are your,
I've got a couple of students who are actually working in Major League Baseball on this kind of stuff. And the thing about the Moneyball stuff that made it so good was it was often rooted in somebody's ideas. They weren't mainstream ideas, but Bill James had been writing books forever and arguing things like walks are undervalued and long pitch counts are undervalued and stuff like that. Silly bases are overvalued. And so Moneyball, they went out and they gathered some data and try and test those theories, which is different from data mining, where you look at a whole bunch of data without understanding what any of the words mean, and you come back with so-and-so does well on Thursdays, which makes no sense whatsoever. And so if you start with like a premise, an idea that this might work and then test it with data, that's much, much better than just floundering around looking for coincidental correlations. And especially if it's inside a black box, because then if the black box algorithm says, send Ross up to bat now, and you're like, well, why? And the algorithm is saying, well, it's Friday afternoon and Ross does well on Friday afternoon. Then you're in a world of trouble. Also, I want to say on the replication crisis that it is really good to, whatever model you have, to do out of sample test. And when I wrote my thesis back in the 60s, late 60s, it was called in sample and out of sample. And we routinely did that. You built a model and you had ideas and you estimated it, and then you tested out of sample. The problem with when you're doing data mining with so much data and so many computers is you can do the in sample, out of sample thing over and over and over and over again. And so just like 1 out of 20, looking at random numbers, 1 out of 20 times you'll find statistically significant in sample. Well, 1 out of 400 times you'll find statistically significant in sample and out of sample. And so that those I did not mention at the time, I saved it for just this moment. All those tweak correlations I found before, they're even closer correlations out of sample than in sample. And that's why I picked them, because I went through, I did millions and millions of stuff, and then I sorted them by which had the best out of sample fit. And then the ones that had good out of sample fit and good in sample fit, those are the ones I reported. And so in sample, out of sample is not enough, because with so much data and so powerful computers, you can still beat that system too. And now some things like the sciences, the hard scientists, you can just keep doing the experiment over and over and over again, and eventually it's going to crash. But you take something like my main field, economics, and you got a limited amount of data, and you can't be testing things 1,000 times, 100 times. Or like one of my books, I talk about the models for predicting presidential elections, and it's a bunch of p-hacking and harking going on there. But how do you get out of sample test? Well, they got one election, they got it wrong. So they fiddled over their model. Well, now you got to wait 4 years for one more data point, just one data point, which they might get right by the luck of the draw. And so things where there's limited data, like social sciences, you can't just go with the in sample, out of sample indefinitely. Travis, get his thing working again. So, there you are. There you are. You're unmuted. Hey, Travis.
I sorry about that. I didn't want to waste
worries.
anybody's time. My 10-year-old computer. Anyway, my question was, is anybody at a governmental or advisory level looking at the potential for addressing any of this through legislation?
Oh, I don't know if you can address it through legislation.
Yeah, I wonder.
I've got a lot of correspondents who are in the medical profession, and there's been a lot of replication crisis in medicine. And John Ioannidis has spent his life looking at famous medical studies to show how they don't replicate. And a lot of doctors correspond with me about how bad AI does in medicine. And the government just passed a law where medical treatments that involve smartphones and iWatches and stuff like that don't have to go through the normal random controlled trials to get approved. And we will test them using real data, which is we'll let people try them out on their iWatch and see how well it works in the real world. And the people I talked to, the doctors I talked to, think that's absolutely ridiculous because, for example, one of the things was it was supposed to detect irregular heartbeats. And so there was a study at Stanford, I can't remember how many tens of thousands of people wore their iWatches and set it on to detect irregular heartbeats. And what turned out was most of the people who got the notice ignored it. Some of the people who didn't get the notice didn't ignore it. They went in and got tested anyway. And that we have no measure of false positives, false negatives, or anything in there because it was not a random controlled trial. And it was just legislation passed for the benefit of companies who want to sell fitness applications that you can wear in various ways. And it's essentially useless because they've gotten away from random controlled trials. So I wouldn't trust the government to come in and save the day here. I mean, it is replication crisis is well known among scientists, and a lot of people are pushing back on it now. And so there are a lot of journals now that say you're supposed to prepare a statement before you start your research, not before you write the paper. Before you start your study, put a plan down. What I'm going to do, what data I'm going to look at, what test I'm going to run, and then after the fact, come back and say, this is what I did, what I said I was going to do, and this is what I found. Or if you made a change, you got to explain why you made a change. And so there is pushback, and you can beat that system too, though.
Fair enough. Thank you, Dave.
Okay. Anything else?
Any other questions?